Well, here we are again, and this is probably the last episode I'm going to be recording in this block before the next Alien Biospheres video is released. Still don't know when exactly I'm going to release these, but I'm going to try and stagger them out over the next month, 2 months, depends how things go. And future me, if you're watching this, not hello future me, I have no idea why he would be watching this video, but if for some reason he is, hi Tim, hope you're doing well. But if Bib from the future is watching this, then I hope you're hanging in there and that everything is going okay. I know that this episode is going to be a little bit lame and boring, and there are some parts that I'm still not entirely sure how you're going to handle, but it's okay because, well, you know what's coming next. Anyway, with that, thank you very much once again to all of the patrons. And it's entirely possible that by the time I release this list of patrons here will be out of date, which I apologize for, but everything will be updated for the next one. So, continuing on with where we left off. So first, just a little bit of follow-up with the yes-no questions thing. I brought up last time that the at ending that we originally had was kind of similar to the ad ending for the reportative. And I said I was fine with that, but thinking about it a bit more, I think I would prefer if they were a little bit more distinct than that. Which is very easy to fix. I just changed the protoform to include a pharyngeal and a U, which would lower to an O, to give us an ut ending. And again, because it's a clitic, it will be immune to vowel harmony, so no matter what it attaches to, it'll always surface as just ut. Which kind of reminds me of the Turkish yor suffix, because everyone always goes on about Turkish's vowel harmony system as being so pristine and perfect. But one of the most common suffixes that you use with almost every verb is yor, which is just the suffix for the continuous aspect. And for some reason, yor just always comes out as yor, no matter what the other vowels in the stem are, no matter what's going on with the vowel harmony, it's always just yor. And not only that, but it also blocks vowel harmony as well. So all the suffixes that come after yor take back harmony, regardless of what the stem is doing. So like the word for I want is not istiyorum, as you'd expect, with the front vowel E in isti spreading all the way through. It's istiorum, where the yor just stays yor, and the first person singular ending just stays And I assume that's just because yor got suffixed on relatively recently in history, after the vowel harmony system had already been sort of set in stone. And as I recall, I'm pretty sure that the yor ending came from the converb form of a verb that meant to walk, if I'm remembering correctly. Anyway, that has absolutely nothing to do with anything. The point is that our yes or no question suffix is now going to be ut instead of at. Now that's all well and good, I do like that, but I've also been thinking again about this possibility of an or not ending, just because that etymology just makes the most sense to me. I think the thus or so or therefore also makes sense. It just has a little bit more of a conjectural feel to me. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the conjectural form, but I think or not just makes all the sense in the world for a yes-no, one or the other dichotomy. Now, I think I dismissed that last time because I was afraid that the y-u form, which I think I misremembered as that being a long vowel there, but it's not, it's a short vowel. I think I was afraid that the Y would assimilate too often, or just sort of get lost in the mix. Like we have lots of forms with a Y or an E already. But I was thinking, if the word for or had a consonant that palatalized before the Y, like say it was something like si, which actually because of the I that would be si, which then the phrase for or not would be si, which would ultimately just shorten it into a si. But the problem with that would be, again, depending on when exactly it got attached, what sound changes would actually apply to it. Like if it got to attach to a form like vak, would it be vaksi? Or would the metathesis need to take place and become vasku, and then would all the other stuff happen to make it ultimately come out as varak? I don't think it would. But then if we didn't do that, then that would mean we would have a KS cluster, which would be like the only place in the language where you would get that kind of cluster, which I'm not a big fan of. And we can't fix it by just changing it to a y or some other voiced sound, because that would always become an R, and then, again, that's the same issue of if there's an R there, does that metathesize as well? The only other thing I can immediately think of is to maybe make it vowel initial, in which case the final vowel would get deleted and you would end up with just an ear ending. Or if we didn't want to have yet another R sound, we could leave it devoiced and just say that it ends up as an is suffix, or whatever other vowel we wanted it to be. It doesn't have to be an I, and whatever vowel it was would still be immune to vowel harmony. Maybe with this one we can leave the vowel as an A. So that's another possibility, at least, for a different type of interrogative. I do still like this ut ending, though. I don't know if I'm just going to demote that one to being conjectural and make this one the default question marker, or maybe just say that both of these are just acceptable ways of asking questions. Maybe they have slightly different undertones to them, but I'm kind of reminded of, in Mandarin, the difference between ma and ne, because ma is the standard question marker. You just slap it onto the end of a statement and it turns it into a yes or no question. But then there's ne, which honestly I'm still not 100% sure when it's used or what it actually means. But it seems to me to be more sort of general. Like I'm thinking, as long as I'm remembering this correctly, like if someone asks you, 你好吗? Like how are you? You can respond with 我很好,你呢? And that means I'm very well, and you? Question mark? Or what about you? So ni is you, and then ne is just a sort of general what about, or like this is a question. Someone who knows more about Mandarin than me, feel free to explain exactly how that works in the comments, if I'm even remembering that correctly. Because maybe these two question markers could operate in a similar kind of way, or just completely in free variation, who knows. The other thing that does for us is it gets us a word for or. Actually, I just realized, if the protoform is asi, then would that I cause umlaut? It depends when this or not form started being treated as a single sort of phonological unit, essentially as a single word. Because if it was a single word, then it would be asiu, and that I is not in a stressed or final position, so it would not cause umlaut at any point. But just for the word or on its own, that would stay as asi, in which case that would cause umlaut, so the word for or on its own would be is. Yeah, I guess that's fine. Also, just for the hell of it, I think I'm going to say that protoform began with a glottal stop, just because I keep forgetting that we have a glottal stop available in the protolang. So that gives us, I think, our first proper conjunction. And I'm just leaving this as a general meaning of or at this point, because it's certainly a possibility that this language would have multiple words for or, like in Turkish where you have veya and yoksa, which, as long as I understand it correctly, yoksa is specifically either one or the other, whereas veya is more of a general, like if you're listing things like this or this or this. I think that's the general rule, but that might not be 100% sound. Again, Turkish speakers, let me know. This is another thing that consistently surprises me, is how often languages have multiple conjunctions that seem to have the same meaning, but are just used in very subtly different contexts. Like Nahuatl has 5 or 6 ways of saying and I still have no clue what the rules are for when to use which one. And Latin as well, you have et, and you have que, and then you have atque, plus a couple of others, I think. And they all have general guidelines of where you should expect to use them and see them, but a lot of the time they end up being used essentially interchangeably. So for now, I guess for the context that it's being used in which it becomes a question marker, it has a sort of either-or meaning, as in one or the other. So I'll just pencil that in for now. Okay, so we got 2 potential forms for interrogatives. I'm going to leave the conjectural and the rhetorical for now, because that does get into more complex discourse stuff that I want to keep for later down the line. And also a lot of the time it's just a matter of combining the standard interrogative strategies, sometimes with the evidentials in interesting ways. We'll get to that. For now, I wanted to get to the thing that we alluded to last time, and that is verb nominalization. So essentially, what I'm just trying to make sure here is that we can just take a verb root, slap one of these endings onto it, and decline it in the normal fashion, and get forms that are distinct from any of the verb forms, so that they can be unambiguously used as nouns. I think we should be able to get away with that. But even if not, it would be no difficulty at all if we had to come up with some other form, some other suffix that we needed to slap on to make it clear that it's been nominalized. Like in Latin, to form an agent noun, you don't just take the verb and decline it normally, you have to put the tor ending on. Like you take the word, I believe it's docere, which means, I think, to teach or to instruct, and you stick tor at the end and you get doctor, instructor or teacher, which, yes, is also where we get the English word doctor. So at the end of the last episode, we got these forms for to sleep in the human class. So this would mean a sleeper, or one who sleeps. So now, I guess, might as well try it with the other two classes as well. So for the animate class, what would that actually mean? An animate thing that sleeps. It could just mean like a sleeping animal, or it could be an instrument that is used to accomplish the act of sleeping. Maybe like a sleeping potion? Or some herbal remedy you can take to help you fall asleep? Or would that be inanimate? Well, what I'm thinking is that the inanimate class will just be to render the verbal noun. So that would just mean sleep as a general concept. I think with just historical changes and how messy class systems can often end up being, I think having a sleeping agent in the animate class is fine. I mean, there are plenty of languages with animate-inanimate splits where certain types of culturally important plants or things end up in the animate class, so yeah, that's fine. Okay, so there are our protoforms, and let's see what they produce. So in the singular accusative and locative, that's identical to the forms for the human class, which I don't think is a problem. Context helps a lot, and there are plenty of times in English where things that end in an ER could be interpreted either as the instrument or the human agent. The only one I can immediately think of is lawnmower, where I think that usually refers to the machine itself, but you could also call the person whose task it is to mow the lawnmower. Not a perfect example, but you get the idea. I think that's fine. In the dual, the primary difference is just a matter of fronting. And it occurs to me now, why do these forms begin in I? They would have begun in A, which would then be fronted by the stressed E, but then the only reason that the turns into an I is when it is stressed, which is not in this case. So these should begin in There we go. Okay, having finished the dative form for this one, I'm now wondering how I got these for these other words. Don't know how we'd get the geminate R there, because the vowel between the proto-S and the R was stressed. Because the whole ending suffix bit there would be tisiura. The E and the U would combine into an E. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it would always just end up as an irur ending. Unless I pulled some other trick that I can't remember. The only thing I can think of is if I said that under these circumstances the stress changes. But I specifically said that the dative doesn't remove the final vowel. But I seem to have been convinced that there would end up with a geminate R there. I really don't know why, though. Might have to go back and review some of the old footage. Oh well, we'll check that later. Okay, and now the last one, the inanimate, the easy one. Okay, so those I think are fine. We've only got a handful of forms that overlap between the nouns and the verbs, like this ölhür in the genitive, which is the same as the second principal part, but I think context should be perfectly fine to disambiguate those. And again, because sleep is inanimate and therefore a mass noun, the general word for sleep as an abstract concept will be in the plural by default, whereas the singular would be more like an instance of sleep, like a nap or something. So I'm going to provisionally say that using the class markers is a standard option for nominalizing verbs. There will definitely be other ways of nominalizing verbs. We're going to get to derivational morphology later. But in principle, that works. And part of the reason why I bring that up is, by my estimation, we are getting perilously close to being able to give this language a name. And just for a brief digression on that, Of the standard ways of coming up with a name for a language, one that I frequently use, maybe actually a little bit too often, is to take a verb that means to speak, or something along those lines, and then just nominalize it into something that means speech, and just have that be the name of the language. Like, that's what Adun means. Adun comes from an old word that means to speak, with a nominalization thing on it, so Adun literally just means speech. Same with Alothwe. Alothwe is just the verb that means to speak in the passive, plus an instrumental prefix that means by means of words. So Alothwe is literally it is spoken with words. You can also sometimes have some sort of adjective or some other sort of qualifier on speech. Like Ulazradun is literally true speech, or correct speech. And the other standard option is to just come up with a word for tongue, which very frequently gets extended to mean language in general. Sometimes an augmentative or some other derivational affix will be involved as well. And what I'm thinking I might like to do for this language is, we've got our possessive pre-words, whatever you want to call them, and I sort of want to get as much use out of them as possible. So maybe a first-person plural possessive word before the word speech or tongue, so our language. The question then would be, which possession class does it fall into? In what way does one own the language they speak? I don't think it would be alienable, because that comes from carry, which has a very sort of physical connotation to it. It could be inalienable, like the language we exist with. I mean, the verb that seems most obvious to give rise to a possession class for a language or words would be to speak. It's the language we speak. That would actually be kind of a fun way of combining both of these strategies. If the word for the language itself comes from tongue, and then it has a possessive word that comes from to speak, the tongue we speak. So does that mean then there would be a specific possession class for speech, or words? That seems feasible to me, I think. And I can imagine also that maybe the possessive word is not required. Like if you just drop the that we speak part and just say the tongue, most people would know what you're talking about. So if we went with tongue, I'm pretty certain tongue would be in the animate class, because it's a body part, in which case it would probably end in a vowel, at least in the nominative. And if the possessive word is in the first person plural, then it would almost certainly begin with a T. We don't have a word for to speak yet, do we? We have a word for to say, which may also mean to speak. The protoform is da, so just for fun, let's see if that works if we made a whole possession class for it. Okay, there are our protoforms, so those would be the forms that we would get, and they're okay, I think. So the one we would need for a meaning of our language would be tad, which is fine, I guess. Kind of hard to judge in isolation. It's certainly an option, but if it doesn't work, then we can just come up with some other verb of speech to fill this category. Of course, since this is the name of the language, I really want to make sure that it's a name that I like, so there's probably going to have to be a lot of fiddling and finessing with this part. And it's probably best if I don't do that on air, just because I don't want to sit here for hours just playing around with different forms until I finally find something that I think works. So I'll leave it there for now, and just sort of leave that as a teaser for next time. So probably by the next episode, or maybe the one after that, we're going to have a name for this language. So look forward to that. In the meantime, though, something that I've just remembered that I wanted to bring up, that doesn't really have much to do with anything. I realized a while ago that our phonological rules give us something kind of weird. How weird, I'm not exactly sure, though. So we've said that this language does not allow word initial clusters, or word final clusters. But specifically for the word initial clusters, just vowel loss never happens in a way that will allow for word initial clusters to happen. However, unstressed oo and e become semivowels in this language. So let's say you had a proto-root like tuhali or something. So first the h drops out to give us tuali, and then the unstressed u turns into a w, so we get twali. So depending on whether or not you want to count the glide as a vowel or a consonant, we do kind of have initial clusters with glides only. But then we do have this change where W becomes V when it's following an obstruent or word initially. So that means that twali would become tvali. And that means that the only word initial clusters that would be allowed in this language are an obstruent followed by V, which strikes me as kind of odd. Like, of all the clusters to allow, obstruent followed by V does not seem to be one of the more common ones cross-linguistically. And for that to be the only cluster that's allowed, I think it makes sense with the rules that we've established. But people who know more about phonology than me, how weird does that seem? Does that seem justifiable? Because I kind of like it. I like the tva word initially, that's cool. But if it doesn't make sense that that sequence would be allowed and no other clusters, then I'm fine with getting rid of it. The only other thing that I can think of at this point is at the epenthesis stage, when illegal word final clusters are getting broken up. Maybe the same thing happens word initially as well, so it becomes tavali, which actually, looking at our changes, W goes to V only after epenthesis has already happened. And I did actually include word initial in the wording here. I don't remember that, but okay, I'll go with it. So if that's the case, it would actually be broken up in this stage, and twali would become tawali. And since that W is no longer following an obstruent or in word initial position, it would remain as a W. Honestly, I do actually prefer tvali to tawali, but it's not a huge deal either way. So do let me know what you think about that. And in the meantime, astonishingly, I'm already coming up on time. But I feel like I really haven't done anything useful in this episode. So before we finish up, I just want to touch back on the causative again. Because I talked last time, or the time before that, about the possibility of having a non-productive causative, and then some other causative strategy anytime you wanted a sense of to cause to, in any way that would not already have a lexicalized form for it. And I still cannot really think of any alternative to that. I guess, first of all, one thing that we should probably address is case marking. Because how the causative interacts with case marking varies from language to language. Because in a sentence like, I caused the man to see the dog, in a sentence like that you've got three roles. You've got I, who is the causer. You've got the man, who is the one that is being caused to carry out the action. And then you've got the dog, which is the direct object of the causee's action. So the causee is kind of both a subject and a direct object, because they are carrying out their own action, but they are also the direct object of the causing. So languages will vary in how they treat those roles in terms of case marking. As I remember, Wikipedia has a pretty good page about this. I think if you just go to Wikipedia and search for causative, it has like tables of all the different possibilities and which languages use them. And there are some languages, like I'm pretty sure Japanese and Hungarian both do almost exactly the same thing, where if the causee is carrying out the action volitionally, essentially what we would say using the English verb to let, like I let the man see the dog, then you use one case. I think it's the dative, let's just say. But if it's non-volitional, if it's I force the man to see the dog, then that's conveyed with a case alternation. Now the causee is, I think, in the instrumental, which I think is really, really cool, and I basically just stole that for Nakachti. So the question is, how would case marking work with the causative in this language? So we have a sentence like, I caused the man to see the dog. Assuming we're sticking with a lexical causative here, which I think makes sense because in a lot of languages with morphological causatives, the verb to see with the causative on it just means to show. So it's like, I showed the man the dog. So with the auxiliary construction, that would be, I am, while see causing. So which of those two is actually the direct object? Because in the English word show, like, I showed the dog to the man, the dog is definitely the direct object of to show, but you're also causing the man to see the dog. In some languages, both the causee and the direct object are both just marked in the accusative. but I'd prefer if they were marked differently just to disambiguate things. So like in Turkish, the way you do that is the causee is always in the dative. So man would be dative and dog would be accusative. And that would make sense with the meaning of to show as well. I showed the dog to the man. Man would be in the dative there. And also, actually, if we do go with the lexical source of to give, that holds true as well, because the indirect object ditransitive construction of to give follows the same pattern. It's like, I give seeing of the dog to the man. Yeah, I think that works. Especially since that converb, again, ultimately comes from a nominalization. I am at the see-giving of the dog to the man. Okay, cool. For the time being, I'm just going to stick with that. Now, would anything be different if it was a non-lexicalized form? Well, how would a non-lexicalized form even work? What's a verb that wouldn't be likely to have a morphological causative attached to it? I caused the man to, I don't know, wash the dog. There probably isn't going to be a single lexeme in this word that means to cause someone to wash something. So that would be I am, while causing, the man is the direct object of the causing, assuming it would follow typical SOV structure. I think that would be the right order, maybe? So I don't know what the lexical source of this causative could come from. It could maybe be give as well. I don't know if we could get away with using that twice. Or it could just be a completely different verb, something like make, or command, or just cause. So thinking about things in terms of lexical source, it's I am at the causing of the man's washing of the dog. Well, if that were the case, both man and dog would be in the genitive, and then the genitive becomes the accusative. Or it could be I am at the causing of the washing of the dog by the man, so then the man would stay in the dative. But then if that was the case, wouldn't that be essentially a mediopassive construction? The dog's washing by the man. So then would wash need to take the detransitive? Man, this is getting confusing. Well, first of all, what form would wash be in? It would have to also be in a converb form. It would have to be, surely. Unless we say that there is some other non-finite form that you put the verb in if there's already a converb there. I don't want to have to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. Which I don't think it would be. Well, if it was I am at the causing of the washing, then wash would be nominalized and then put in the genitive, which is exactly the same root that gives us the third principal part, the perfective converb. Whereas for a present interpretation, the causing would be in the imperfective converb. And then just by the rules of how these converb constructions work, the direct object has to be in the old genitive, which is the new accusative. So dog must be in the accusative, I think. And then I really can't think of any other situation for the man than being put in the dative. I mean, I do like how that gives us the same case arrangement as the other causative, but I just don't understand how the meaning would change, if at all, if we apply the detransitive to wash. Because that should theoretically turn it into a mediopassive construction, but that doesn't change the meaning at all. We already know that the man is washing the dog. I guess it would just change the emphasis slightly? The only other thing I can think of would be if the sentence were like, I am causing in the imperfective converb, and then the man is the accusative, because the man is being caused to do something, and then wash would be in some other form, maybe also the imperfective converb? So it's like, I am causing the man washing the dog. Maybe, again, I don't particularly like the double accusative there. I'm going to have to think about that later, because I sense there is quite a rabbit hole to be dived into with this sort of stuff. In the meantime, with the lexical causative, I just wanted to test the re form again, like we did here, just to see if it can consistently give us some suitably different forms. So do we have a good verb that would make sense to have a lexical causative applied to it? I guess we could use the copulae, to cause to be, like to bring about or create. Copula came from to live, and the locative copula came from to exist. Both of those, cause to live or cause to exist, both of those could have a general causativized meaning of to bring about or to create. I'm going to go with the regular copula for the time being, just because I'm more curious about how the ri ending is going to interact with those vowels there. Okay, for the first one, that's interesting. When the palatal stop becomes a Y, with the fronting and the vowel changes that happen, I think the entire thing just becomes een. Or actually, no, umlaut comes before diphthong reduction. So that would be ayin. That one turns into a whole mess of vowels, which I think, through vowel harmony and diphthong reduction, would just result in a form that's identical to the non-causative form, which is what I was afraid of. Again, that's not the end of the world. I think context would definitely help there, as well as case marking. And then we end up with ais for the last one. It's doable, I suppose. I'm actually going to try with a locative copula as well, just to see how that pans out. Well, in the first form, we've got a difference between hinnin and hinnin. Hanra versus hannar. That's nice. And so is hanra versus hannis. Okay, we've got a little bit of variation going on there. And I like how we're not adding extra syllables. I don't know, I think that's going to require some more testing. But that will have to be for another day, because I am running out of time now. So let's finish up once again with an example sentence or two. We haven't really made very many words in this episode that are conducive to example sentences. How about something like, the woman's child saw the sleeper on the grass. Like, the person who was sleeping on the grass, basically. Actually, wait, no, we don't have a verb for to see yet. I could coin one now, but to see has some implications that would take a while to explain. Like, very often it becomes polysemous with to understand, and sometimes a different root takes over for to see, stuff like that. So I'll save that for next time. I guess we do have to sense. Yeah, sure, let's go with that, just for the sake of experimentation. And what tense do we want? Let's do future perfect, because I don't think we've used that one yet. So, the woman's child will have sensed the sleeper on the grass. Or, the woman's child will have, become aware of the person who is sleeping on the grass, I guess. Okay, so first of all, the subject is the child, which is being possessed by the woman. So child in the nominative is nilwa, and then we have the woman. Now the woman is the possessor, but we don't have a genitive case in this language. We could just put the woman in the accusative, since the accusative used to be the genitive. So sedis nilwa, I think that would be understandable as the woman's child. But if we're using one of these possessive words, which I want to, then it would be in a relative clause, of which the woman would be the subject. Because the woman's child would literally be the child that the woman has. Or even more literally, the woman has child. So woman would actually be in the nominative. And the possession class between a woman and child, I guess it would depend on exactly what the relationship would be. Assuming this would be a mother and her child, that would definitely be inalienable. Which again makes me think that just using the accusative would be fine, and that would just be understood. Because often inalienable possession is less marked than alienable, I believe. Like in Mandarin, where you can just use the pronoun and you don't have to use de if it's inalienable. But assuming we did want to use the possessive word, that would be human singular, so that would be vamhan. So the woman's child, sada vamham nilwa. Then we come to the auxiliary verb. For the future perfect, we want form 3. For the human singular, that's van. Then we might as well do the other half of the verb while we're at it. So that's the third principal part of to sense, which is iri. Now that goes at the end of the sentence, and between the two halves of the verb, we have the sleeper on the grass. Now on the grass, since it's an adpositional phrase, would come first. Grass being a mass noun, we would use the plural by default here. So locative plural of grass is nimir, and then sleeper in the accusative is ilhus. So the whole thing together would be Sadavamhanilwa vanimir ilhus iri. Okay, so I want to end on this question for all of you. So something that I quite like about this language so far is the fact that I can't think of any natlang to compare this language to in terms of what it sounds like. I really like it when that happens. Like, I like it when my languages have their own phonesthetic identity. So my question for all of you is there a natlang that this language reminds you of purely in terms of how it sounds? I'd be very curious to know, because for me, nothing is coming to mind at this point, but I'm curious to hear what all of you think. Okay, and with that said, I think I'm going to have to call it here. Thank you very much for watching, and tune in next time where we crack on with some more verb stuff, and hopefully finally get a name for this language. After, more than 2 years working on it, we finally get a name for it. Cool, so look forward to that, and I will see you after Alien Biospheres.